The late January sun cast long shadows across Rodeo Drive, painting the iconic Beverly Hills street in shades of gold and amber. Dylan Carter sat on the concrete ledge outside a luxury boutique, his weathered acoustic guitar resting against his knee. The instrument had seen better days. Scratches covered its body, and the sixth string had been replaced so many times he'd lost count. But it still sang, and that was all that mattered. Dylan's fingers moved across the frets with practiced ease, his calloused fingertips pressing down on strings that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. He was 28 years old, but some days he felt twice that. The California sun had bronzed his skin, and his dark brown hair fell just past his ears, perpetually in need of a trim he couldn't afford. His hazel eyes, once bright with ambition, now carried a weariness that came from too many disappointments and too many nights wondering if he'd made the right choices. Around him, Rodeo Drive pulsed with life. Tourists snapped photos in front of designer storefronts, Gucci, Versace, Prada, while couples strolled hand in hand, shopping bags dangling from their arms. A valet pulled up in a gleaming silver Bentley, and a woman in a fur coat stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement as she disappeared into Cartier. The air smelled of expensive perfume, fresh flowers from the nearby arrangements, and the faint exhaust from luxury cars idling at the curb. Dylan strummed a chord progression, letting the notes hang in the air before beginning to sing. His voice was rich and textured, carrying a depth that surprised people who expected just another struggling musician looking for spare change. He'd chosen "Is There Life Out There" by REBA MCENTIRE, a song that had lived in his bones since childhood, since before everything fell apart. "She married when she was 20. She thought she was ready," Dylan sang, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the street. "Now she's not so sure. She thought she'd done all the things that a woman should do." The lyrics flowed from him like a confession. He thought of his mother, Patricia Carter, who had sung this very song while making breakfast in their small house in Bakersfield. She'd had dreams too, dreams of Nashville, of stages and spotlights. But life had other plans. She'd married Dylan's father, Raymond Carter, had Dylan, and somewhere along the way, those dreams had withered. When Dylan was 10, she'd finally left, choosing the open road over the family that had anchored her in place. Dylan's father had never been the same after that. Raymond had worked double shifts at the oil refinery, providing for his son while nursing a broken heart. He'd supported Dylan's musical ambitions, driving him to guitar lessons, buying him his first real guitar for his 16th birthday. "You got your mama's gift," Raymond had told him once, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't waste it like she did." But then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Dylan had been in his 3rd year at the Berklee College of Music in Boston, finally living his dream, when he got the call. He'd dropped everything, withdrawn from school, and moved back to California to care for his father. The medical bills had piled up faster than Dylan could count. Chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. They'd burned through savings, maxed out credit cards, taken out loans against the house. For 2 years, Dylan had watched his father fight and fade. He'd learned to administer medications, change IV bags, and hold his father's hand through the worst of the pain. Music became an afterthought, something he did only to soothe his father during sleepless nights. Raymond Carter died on a Tuesday morning in March, the sun streaming through the hospital window, Dylan singing "Amazing Grace" as his father took his last breath. The house had to be sold to cover the remaining medical debt. Dylan, now 24 and adrift, had packed what little he owned into his 15-year-old Honda Civic and driven to Los Angeles. He told himself he was chasing opportunities, that LA was where dreams came true. But the truth was simpler and sadder. He had nowhere else to go. 4 years later, here he was, singing on street corners for tourists who sometimes stopped, sometimes didn't. living in a studio apartment in Koreatown that cost $1,800 a month, half of which came from his roommate, Jackson Phillips, a line cook at a downtown restaurant who worked nights and slept days. Dylan had tried the traditional route: open mic nights at clubs, submitting demos to producers, even auditioning for reality TV singing competitions. But the music industry was a machine that chewed up and spat out thousands of hopefuls every year, and Dylan had learned he was just another face in an endless crowd. So he'd returned to what he knew: the raw, unfiltered connection of street performance. There was something honest about it, something pure. No record labels, no producers telling him to change his sound, no rejection emails. Just him, his guitar, and whoever chose to listen. A middle-aged couple stopped a few feet away, the woman pulling out her phone to record. Dylan nodded at them, continuing the song. She wants to go to college. She wants to learn to paint. She wants to prove to herself and to everyone else that it's never too late. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, singing about unfulfilled dreams while living the very life the song mourned. He'd walked away from college, from his chance to become everything his father had believed he could be. The guilt was a constant companion, a weight he carried in his chest that no amount of rationalization could ease. As he reached the chorus, his voice swelled with emotion. Is there life out there, so much she hasn't done? Is there life beyond the family and the home? A woman in designer sunglasses dropped a $20 bill into his open guitar case, offering a sympathetic smile before hurrying away. Dylan had learned to read the looks. Pity, mostly, mixed with a touch of admiration for his talent and a larger measure of relief that they weren't in his position. Sometimes he wanted to shout at them, "I had a full scholarship to Berkeley. I was going to make it, but life happened, and here I am." But he never did. Instead, he smiled, thanked them, and kept playing. The afternoon wore on. Dylan cycled through his repertoire: Johnny Cash, Chris Stapleton, some original songs he'd written in the quiet hours before dawn when sleep wouldn't come. His guitar case accumulated ones and fives, the occasional 10 or 20. On a good day, he could make $150 in 4 hours. Today was shaping up to be decent. Around 4 o'clock, the crowd on Rodeo Drive began to shift. The lunch crowd had dispersed and the late afternoon shoppers were emerging. Dylan decided to play "Is There Life Out There" one more time. It was his mother's song, his song, the song that captured everything he felt but couldn't articulate. He closed his eyes as he began, letting the music wash over him. In his mind, he was back in that Bakersfield kitchen, his mother's voice floating through the air as she flipped pancakes. He was 10 years old again, before the leaving, before the loss, before life had taught him that dreams were fragile things that shattered if you held them too tight or not tight enough. She married when she was 20. She thought she was ready. Dylan didn't notice the black SUV pulling up to the curb half a block away. He didn't see the woman in jeans and a cream-colored sweater step out, sunglasses perched on her head, red hair catching the afternoon light. He was lost in the music, in the memories, in the ache of everything he'd sacrificed and everything he'd lost. REBA MCENTIRE had been in Los Angeles for 3 days, meetings with her management team about an upcoming tour and discussions with Netflix about a potential new series. She'd grown tired of conference rooms and corporate speak, of people telling her what her brand should be and how to reach younger demographics. At 59 years old, she'd earned the right to take a walk without an agenda. Her assistant, Victoria Brennan, had suggested Rodeo Drive, some shopping, some fresh air, a chance to be anonymous behind sunglasses in a city that pretended not to notice celebrities. Reba had agreed, mostly because it was better than another room service meal in her hotel suite. But as she stepped onto the sidewalk, adjusting her sunglasses, she heard something that made her stop mid-stride. A voice, male, rich and textured, singing words she knew as well as her own name, her words, her song. Is there life out there? So much she hasn't done. Reba turned, scanning the street. About 50 feet away, she spotted him. A young man with a guitar, sitting on a ledge, eyes closed, pouring his soul into every note. She'd heard thousands of people sing her songs over the years. Cover bands at county fairs, contestants on singing competitions, drunk karaoke enthusiasts in Nashville bars. But there was something different about this performance, something raw and real that cut through the polished veneer of Rodeo Drive like a knife. "I'll catch up with you in a minute," Reba told Victoria, already moving toward the sound. The assistant started to protest, something about schedules and security, but Reba waved her off. She'd been in this business for over 4 decades. She knew when something, someone, was worth stopping for. As she approached, more details came into focus. The young man's guitar was old, worn, loved. His jeans were faded, his t-shirt clean but clearly not new. His guitar case lay open on the ground, scattered bills, evidence of his afternoon's work. But none of that mattered, because when he sang, really sang, everything else fell away. "She wants to go to college. She wants to learn to paint." Reba stopped about 10 feet away, standing among the small crowd that had gathered. A few people had their phones out, recording. Others just listened, captured by the same quality that had arrested her attention. The young man's eyes were still closed, his fingers dancing across the frets with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of practice. This wasn't just a street musician trying to make rent, Reba realized. This was a real musician, someone with training and talent, someone who'd made choices, or had choices made for them, that led to this sidewalk in Beverly Hills instead of a stage somewhere. As the song built toward its final chorus, emotion cracked in the young man's voice. Not a mistake, not a flaw, but an authentic breaking that revealed the person behind the performance. He sang like someone who understood every word, who'd lived the questions the song posed. Is there life out there? The final chord hung in the air, resonating, fading slowly. The young man, Dylan, though Reba didn't know his name yet, opened his eyes, returning from wherever the music had taken him. He blinked in the sunlight, seeming surprised to find a dozen people watching him. The crowd applauded. Money landed in the guitar case. People offered compliments as they moved on, absorbed back into the rhythm of Rodeo Drive. But Reba didn't move. She stood there, sunglasses now pushed up on her head, looking directly at the young musician who'd just taken her song and made it his own. Dylan's eyes met hers, and for a moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then recognition, followed immediately by disbelief. "That was beautiful," Reba said, her Oklahoma accent still present despite decades in Nashville and LA. "You've got a real gift." Dylan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Thank you. That means, I'm Reba," she said with a smile, extending her hand. "And I'd very much like to know your name and your story if you're willing to share it." Dylan's hand trembled slightly as he shook Reba McEntire's hand. Her grip was firm, warm, real. For a surreal moment, he wondered if the California sun had finally gotten to him, if he was hallucinating from dehydration and too many hours on the pavement. "Dylan," he managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "Dylan Carter." "Well, Dylan Carter," Reba said, releasing his hand but not stepping back. "You just sang my song like you wrote it yourself. That's not something I hear every day." A small crowd still lingered nearby, phones out, clearly recognizing the country music icon. Reba seemed aware but unconcerned, her attention focused entirely on Dylan. Behind her, a well-dressed woman, her assistant, Dylan guessed, hovered with the practiced alertness of someone responsible for managing celebrity encounters. "That song means a lot to me," Dylan said, feeling inadequate even as the words left his mouth. How could he explain what "Is There Life Out There" represented? The mornings with his mother, the weight of unfulfilled dreams, the question that haunted his own sleepless nights. "I could tell," Reba replied. "I've been singing that song since 1992, and I recorded it because it spoke to something real. But hearing you just now, the way you inhabited those lyrics, you weren't just covering a song, you were telling your own story." Dylan looked down at his guitar, running his thumb over a particularly deep scratch near the sound hole. "My mom used to sing it," he said quietly. "Before she left. I was 10. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Reba's expression softened, not with pity, but with understanding. She'd grown up in Oklahoma, the daughter of a world champion steer roper, had seen enough of life's hard edges to recognize pain when it was offered. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "That's a hard age to lose a parent." "She didn't die," Dylan clarified, then wondered why he felt compelled to explain. "She just left. Decided she'd rather chase her dreams in Nashville than stay in Bakersfield with us. Last I heard, about 10 years ago, she was waitressing in Memphis." Reba nodded slowly, processing this information. "And you ended up here, singing on Rodeo Drive." It wasn't a question, but Dylan answered anyway. "Long story." "I've got time," Reba said. She glanced around, noting the crowd, the phones, the attention, though maybe not right here. "There's a coffee shop about 2 blocks down, corner of Wilshire. Less public. Would you be willing to talk for a bit? I'd like to hear that long story." Dylan stared at her, trying to process the invitation. Reba McEntire, the Reba McEntire with 30-plus albums, countless awards and a career spanning decades, wanted to have coffee with him. Street musician Dylan Carter from nowhere, living in a studio apartment with a line cook roommate, $347 in his checking account, and a guitar held together with hope and spare strings. He started, then caught himself. What was he going to say? "No thanks, I have more important things to do." "Yes. Yeah, I'd like that." "Good," Reba said, a genuine smile crossing her face. "Pack up your things and I'll meet you there. The place is called Groundwork Coffee. You know it?" Dylan nodded. He'd walked past it 100 times, but never gone in. $12 for a latte was about 11 more than he could justify. "See you in 10 minutes, Reba said. She turned to her assistant. "Victoria, I'm going to coffee with Dylan here. I'll text you when I'm done." Victoria opened her mouth to protest, professional concern written across her features, but something in Reba's expression stopped her. "I'll be nearby," she said instead. A compromise. "Text me the address." As Reba walked away, the remaining onlookers dispersed, some following her with their cameras, others finally moving on with their days. Dylan stood frozen for a moment, his guitar still in his hands, trying to convince himself this was actually happening. He quickly packed up his equipment, guitar in its case, money from the case transferred to his pocket. $132, plus the 20 from earlier. A decent take for 4 hours. He slung the guitar over his shoulder and headed toward Wilshire, his heart hammering against his ribs. The walk took 5 minutes. Groundwork Coffee occupied a corner space with large windows and a patio dotted with small tables. Through the glass, Dylan could see Edison bulb lighting, exposed brick, and a crowd of beautiful people with MacBooks and expensive coffee drinks. He hesitated at the door, suddenly aware of how he must look. Faded jeans, a worn t-shirt from a 2018 music festival, his guitar case battered and covered in stickers from places he'd been and places he'd dreamed of going. But Reba had invited him. Reba McEntire, who'd grown up in Chockie, Oklahoma, population 18, who'd started singing at rodeos and local bars, who'd worked her way up through sheer talent and determination. If anyone understood that clothes and circumstances didn't define a person's worth, it was her. Dylan pushed through the door. The interior smelled of espresso and fresh pastries. Reba sat at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee already in front of her. She'd chosen a spot away from the windows, more private, where the ambient noise of the espresso machine and quiet conversations would prevent anyone from easily overhearing. "I took a chance and ordered," Reba said as Dylan approached. "Black coffee, okay? I figured we could add things if you want them." "Black's perfect," Dylan said, setting his guitar case against the wall and sliding into the seat across from her. The coffee was good, really good, the kind of rich, complex flavor that came from carefully sourced beans and skilled preparation. He took a sip, buying himself a moment to gather his thoughts. "So," Reba said, wrapping her hands around her own cup, "tell me about Dylan Carter. Where'd you learn to play like that?" And so he did. The story came out in pieces, not chronological, but emotional. His childhood in Bakersfield, his mother's departure, his father's unwavering support, the scholarship to Berkeley, those precious 3 years studying music theory and performance, believing he was finally on the path his talent deserved. Then the phone call, the diagnosis, the impossible choice that hadn't really been a choice at all. "I couldn't let him die alone," Dylan said, staring into his coffee cup. "He'd given up everything for me after Mom left. Worked himself to exhaustion to keep a roof over our heads, to pay for guitar lessons and strings, and that first real guitar. How could I stay in Boston living my dream while he was dying in California?" "You couldn't," Reba said softly. "You did the right thing even though it cost you." "Did I?" The question escaped before Dylan could stop it, raw and vulnerable. "Because some days I wonder if I just gave up. If I used my dad's illness as an excuse to quit before I could fail." Reba leaned back in her chair, regarding him thoughtfully. "How long did you take care of him?" 2 years. Almost 2 years exactly. And in that time, did you resent him? Did you wish you were back in Boston instead?" Dylan shook his head immediately. "No, never. Those 2 years they were hard, the hardest thing I've ever done. But I got to really know my dad. We had conversations we'd never had time for before. I played for him every night, and even when the pain was bad, the music helped. He told me stories about my mom, about their early days together before everything got complicated. He told me he was proud of me, that choosing to come home proved I was a better person than a better musician. And he died with me holding his hand, singing to him. I wouldn't trade that for anything." "Then you didn't quit," Reba said firmly. "You chose love over ambition, and there's no shame in that. None." Dylan felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of guilt he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Hearing those words from REBA MCENTIRE, who'd built an empire on talent and determination, who'd fought through industry sexism and personal tragedies and come out the other side still standing, it meant something. "What happened after he passed?" Reba asked gently. "Debt," Dylan said bluntly. "Mountains of it. Medical bills that insurance barely touched. A second mortgage on the house. Credit cards maxed out paying for treatments that didn't work. I had to sell the house just to get back to zero. Took everything, family photos, his tools, furniture my grandparents had owned. All of it gone." He paused, taking another sip of coffee. "I packed what fit in my car and drove to LA. Told myself I'd make it in the music industry, that I'd honor my dad's belief in me. But LA it's different than I expected. There are 10,000 talented musicians here, all fighting for the same opportunities. I did the showcase circuit for a while, sent demos to producers, auditioned for every singing competition I could find. Got rejected from everything." "Everything?" Reba raised an eyebrow. "Well, I made it to the second round of American Idol 2 years ago," Dylan admitted. "They told me I had a great voice, but no star quality, whatever that means. Said I was too serious, not marketable enough." Reba snorted, a sound that was both amused and disgusted. "Star quality, the industry's favorite meaningless phrase. You know how many times I was told I wasn't pretty enough, wasn't pop enough, wasn't something enough? If I'd listened to all those voices, I'd still be competing in rodeos instead of headlining them. But you broke through, Dylan said. You figured out how to make it work. I got lucky, Reba corrected. Talent, yes. Hard work, absolutely. But also luck. Right place, right time, right people believing in me. And even then, it took years. I recorded my first album in 1977, and it wasn't until the mid-80s that I really found commercial success. That's almost a decade of rejection and near misses. Dylan had never thought about it that way. The successful always seemed to have been successful, their struggles compressed into brief anecdotes that glossed over the years of doubt and disappointment. So what now? Reba asked. You play on Rodeo Drive, make enough to survive. But is that what you want? Is that enough? The question hit harder than Dylan expected. He'd been in survival mode for so long, get through the day, make enough money for rent and food, don't think too far ahead, that he'd stopped asking himself what he actually wanted. I don't know, he admitted. I love performing, even just on the street. There's something pure about it, about connecting directly with people without all the industry machinery. But is it enough? I guess I don't let myself think about it being not enough, because then I'd have to admit I've wasted 4 years of my life on street corners when I should have been finding another way. Or, Reba said, you've been honing your craft, learning to connect with audiences, developing an authenticity that a lot of studio musicians never find. Street performing isn't failure, Dylan. It's a different path. A path that ends where? Dylan asked, more frustrated with himself than with her. I'm 28 years old, living in a studio apartment with a roommate, no savings, no prospects, no plan. I watch tourists drop $500 in a store without blinking, and I'm grateful when someone gives me a $5 bill. This isn't a path. It's treading water. Reba didn't respond immediately. She studied him with those sharp, knowing eyes that had seen more of the music industry's highs and lows than most people would experience in a lifetime. Can I be honest with you? She finally said. Please. You've got the talent. That's not the issue. But you're carrying so much weight. Guilt about your mom, grief about your dad, anger at the industry, frustration with yourself, that it's suffocating your music. When you sang Is There Life Out There, I heard all of that, and it made the performance powerful. But it also made it heavy. If you're going to move forward, really move forward, you need to find a way to transform that weight into something lighter. Not forgetting it, but reframing it. Dylan wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come because she was right. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost, what he'd given up, what hadn't worked out, that he'd forgotten to imagine what might still be possible. I don't know how to do that, he said quietly. Nobody does. Not at first, Reba replied. But I can tell you this. It starts with a choice. You can keep telling yourself the story of everything that went wrong, or you can start writing a new story about what comes next. Both versions are true, but only one of them gives you a future. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. That's my management company. I'm not promising anything, but I'd like to hear more of your music. Original stuff if you've got it. Send some recordings to that email address. Mention my name, and they'll make sure I see it. Dylan picked up the card, the heavy cardstock feeling impossibly significant in his hand. Thank you. Seriously. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Reba said with a smile. You've still got to do the work. But Dylan, you've got something real. Don't let the weight of the past crush it before it has a chance to grow. They talked for another 20 minutes, about music, about the industry, about life in general. Reba shared stories from her early days, the struggles and small victories that had eventually built into a legendary career. Dylan found himself relaxing, laughing even, feeling more like himself than he had in months. When they finally stood to leave, Reba pulled him into a quick hug. "Keep singing," she said, "and send me those recordings. I mean it." "I will," Dylan promised. He watched her leave, her assistant materializing from wherever she'd been waiting, the two of them disappearing around the corner. Dylan stood on the sidewalk, the business card in his hand, his guitar over his shoulder, and for the first time in 4 years, he felt something that might have been hope. Dylan didn't go straight home after leaving Groundwork Coffee. He walked, his guitar case bumping against his leg, the business card burning in his pocket like a talisman. Reba McEntire's words looped through his mind. "You can keep telling yourself the story of everything that went wrong, or you can start writing a new story about what comes next." The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He found himself wandering through Beverly Gardens Park, the narrow strip of green that ran along Santa Monica Boulevard. Tourists posed for photos with the Beverly Hills sign, while joggers and dog walkers navigated the paths. Dylan found a bench away from the main traffic and sat down, setting his guitar case beside him. He pulled out his phone, a 3-year-old iPhone with a cracked screen protector, and opened his voice memos app. 217 recordings stared back at him, snippets of songs he'd written over the past 4 years. Some were just chord progressions, musical ideas without words. Others were complete songs, lyrics and melodies captured in the quiet of his apartment or the rare moments when he had access to his friend's garage studio. When was the last time he'd listened to these? Really listened, with the intention of sharing them rather than just cataloging his own failures? Dylan scrolled through the list, reading titles. Bakersfield Blues, Exit Wound, Everything We Couldn't Say, The House on Oleander Street, songs about his parents, about loss, about the gap between dreams and reality. Heavy songs, like Reba had said, songs that mattered but maybe needed something. Reframing. His phone buzzed with a text. "Jackson, working late, don't wait up, pizza in fridge if you want it." Jackson Phillips had been Dylan's roommate for 3 years, having met when they were both scanning Craigslist for affordable housing in Los Angeles, a hunt that felt like searching for unicorns. They'd bonded over shared circumstances, 2 guys in their mid-20s, both chasing dreams in a city that chewed up dreamers and spit them out daily. Jackson wanted to be a chef, to open his own restaurant someday. For now, he worked the line at a trendy downtown restaurant, pulling 60-hour weeks for wages that barely covered his half of rent. They weren't close friends exactly, but they understood each other. Both had left things behind to be here. Both were trying to build something from nothing. Both knew the odds were against them, but showed up anyway. Dylan texted back, "Thanks. Good night at work." He pocketed his phone and opened his guitar case, pulling out the instrument. Without the pressure of performing for money, without the need to play crowd pleasers and covers, he let his fingers find their own path. A chord progression emerged, minor key, melancholic, but not without hope. He hummed along, searching for a melody. Words started forming. "There's a weight I've been carrying, too heavy to name. A catalogue of all my losses, a ledger of blame." He stopped, frustrated. There it was again. The weight, the heaviness. Reba's observation had been too accurate. Every song he wrote circled back to grief, to guilt, to the feeling of being stuck. Where was the light? Where was the possibility? Dylan changed the chord progression, shifting to major, adding a rhythm that lifted instead of dragging. He tried again. "I've been walking through shadows, learning every shade of grey, but shadows mean there's sunshine somewhere along the way." Better. Still honest, still acknowledging the difficulty, but pointing towards something beyond it. He worked the verse for 20 minutes, refining the melody, adjusting lyrics, building a structure. By the time the park lights flickered on, he had the bones of something new. He recorded it into his phone, rough, unpolished, but real. Then he packed up his guitar and headed to the bus stop. The ride back to Koreatown took 45 minutes. The bus crowded with workers ending their shifts, students heading home from evening classes, the full spectrum of Los Angeles life. Dylan's apartment building was a 1960s construction that had seen better decades. The exterior stucco was cracked, the lobby smelled perpetually of kimchi and cleaning products, and the elevator only worked about 70% of the time. But the rent was relatively cheap by LA standards, the building was safe, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions as long as payment arrived on time. He climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, the elevator was broken again, and unlocked the door to apartment 412. The studio was exactly as he'd left it. Jackson's single mattress against one wall, Dylan's against the other, a small kitchenette separating them. A few posters decorated the walls, Dylan's favorite musicians, a map of California, a framed photo of his father. Their belongings were carefully organized, a necessity in 350 square feet. Dylan dropped his guitar case by his bed and went to the mini-fridge, pulling out the promised pizza. Cold pepperoni, which he ate standing at the counter while scrolling through his phone. Instagram was full of musicians he'd known at Berkeley, now signed to labels, touring, living the life he'd left behind. He used to torture himself looking at their posts, but somewhere along the way, he'd made peace with it. Different paths, different choices. He thought about REBA's invitation to send recordings. The opportunity felt simultaneously huge and impossible. What if he sent his songs and she hated them? What if this was just a polite gesture, the kind of thing celebrities said to be nice but never followed through on? But what if it wasn't? Dylan finished his pizza, washed his hands, and opened his laptop. Another Craigslist find, a 2015 MacBook Pro that worked well enough for basic recording. He had GarageBand and a USB audio interface, enough to create decent demos, if not professional recordings. Over the next 4 hours, Dylan dove into his archive. He listened to every voice memo, every rough recording, evaluating with fresh ears. Most of it was too raw, too unfocused. But a few songs stood out. Everything We Couldn't Say, a ballad about his last conversation with his father. Westbound, an up-tempo number about leaving Bakersfield for uncertain futures. And Gravity, a meditation on the forces that hold us down and the choice to break free. He recorded new versions of all three, playing guitar and singing simultaneously to capture the live energy that made his street performances work. Then he added a fourth, the song he'd started in the park, now titled Shadows and Light. By the time he finished, it was past midnight and his fingers ached from playing. Dylan exported the files, opened his email, and stared at the blank message. What did you say to REBA MCENTIRE when sending her your music? How did you sound professional, but authentic, confident, but humble? In the end, he kept it simple. Ms. McEntire, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today on Rodeo Drive. Our conversation meant more than I can adequately express. As you suggested, I'm sending 4 original songs. They represent where I've been and, hopefully, where I'm trying to go. I recorded these tonight in my apartment. They're demos, not polished productions, but I hope they communicate something real. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the reminder that new stories are always possible. Sincerely, Dylan Carter. He attached the files, typed in the email address from REBA's card, and hit send before he could second-guess himself. The whoosh of the outgoing message felt both terrifying and liberating. Jackson came home around 1 in the morning, smelling of fryer oil and exhaustion. You're up late, he observed, dropping his backpack and kicking off his shoes. Productive night, Dylan said. He told Jackson about the encounter with REBA, the performance, the coffee shop conversation, the invitation to send music. Jackson's eyes widened. Holy shit, man, that's huge. Maybe, Dylan said cautiously. Or maybe it's nothing. I don't want to get my hopes up. Screw that, Jackson said, pulling a beer from the fridge. Get your hopes up. Hope is literally all we have. I spend every shift hoping that someday I'll cook my own menu in my own restaurant, even though statistically 90% of restaurants fail, and I have exactly 0 investors and $17,000 in culinary school debt. But if I didn't hope, what would be the point? Dylan smiled despite himself. Jackson had a way of cutting through bullshit to the essential truth. You're right. I'm going to hope. Damn right you are, Jackson said, raising his beer in a toast. To hope and to opportunities, we're definitely going to screw up, but trying anyway. Dylan laughed, grabbed his own beer and clinked bottles with his roommate. They talked for another hour, about dreams, about the city, about the gap between wanting something and achieving it. Then they slept, both exhausted from their respective battles with Los Angeles. The next morning, Dylan woke to 17 new emails. His heart raced as he scrolled through them, but none were from REBA's management company. Just spam, mostly, and a notice that his car insurance payment would be auto-drafted in 3 days. He forced himself not to check email obsessively. She was a busy person. It might take days or weeks to hear back, if he heard back at all. He went to Rodeo Drive anyway, guitar over his shoulder, because rent didn't care about opportunities or maybes. The January day was clear and cool, perfect weather for tourists. Dylan set up in his usual spot and began playing, working through his repertoire with renewed energy. Around noon, a man in his 60s approached, well-dressed, silver hair, expensive watch. He listened to Dylan perform an original song, then waited for him to finish before speaking. "You write that yourself?" the man asked. "Yes, sir," Dylan replied. "It's good, really good." The man pulled out a business card. "I'm Theodore Grant, talent scout for Continental Records. We're always looking for new artists. Give me a call if you're interested in discussing a potential development deal." Dylan took the card, stunned. 2 days ago, he was just another street musician. Now he had cards from REBA MCENTIRE's management and a talent scout from a record label. "Thank you," Dylan managed. "I'll definitely call." Theodore nodded and walked away, leaving Dylan staring at the second business card in as many days. The universe, it seemed, was conspiring to give him exactly what he'd claimed to want. The question was whether he was ready to receive it. Dylan called Theodore Grant's number the next morning, after a sleepless night spent researching Continental Records. What he found was both promising and concerning. Continental was a mid-size independent label known for developing singer-songwriter talent, with a respectable roster that included several Grammy nominees. But the internet was also full of cautionary tales. Artists who'd signed development deals only to find themselves locked into unfavorable contracts, their creative control stripped away, their music shelved indefinitely when it didn't immediately produce hits. The phone rang 3 times before a receptionist answered. "Continental Records, how may I direct your call?" "Theodore Grant, please." "My name is Dylan Carter. He gave me his card yesterday and asked me to call." "One moment." Hold music filled Dylan's ear, some generic jazz that probably came from Continental's own catalog. He paced his tiny apartment, Jackson still asleep on the other side of the room, oblivious to the anxiety radiating off his roommate. "Dylan!" Theodore's voice was warm, enthusiastic. "Thanks for calling. I haven't been able to stop thinking about your music since yesterday. That original song, what was it called?" "Gravity," Dylan supplied. "Gravity, right? Brilliant piece. The lyrics, the melody, your voice, it all works. Look, I know this is sudden, but would you be available to come into the office today? I'd love to introduce you to our A&R team, have you play a few songs, discuss possibilities." Dylan's heart hammered. "Today? Yeah, I can make that work. What time?" "How about 2 o'clock? I'll text you the address. Oh, and bring your guitar. We'd love to hear you perform live." After hanging up, Dylan stood motionless for a full minute, processing. This was happening. Actually happening. He'd sent his songs to REBA less than 48 hours ago, and now a label wanted to meet with him. Jackson woke up around 11, groaning about a late shift the night before. Dylan told him about the call, the meeting, the possibility. "That's amazing, man," Jackson said, though his expression was more cautious than celebratory. "Just be careful, yeah? My cousin's friend signed with a label a few years ago, and they basically owned everything: his music, his image, his schedule. When his album underperformed, they dropped him, but he still couldn't record with anyone else because of the contract terms." "I'll be careful," Dylan promised, though he wasn't entirely sure what careful looked like when opportunity was finally knocking. He spent the next 2 hours preparing, showering, trying on different combinations of his limited wardrobe before settling on dark jeans and a button-down shirt, rehearsing songs, Googling advice for label meetings. The internet offered conflicting wisdom. Be confident but humble, be yourself but marketable, be eager but not desperate. Continental Records occupied the 3rd floor of a building in West Hollywood, not far from the Sunset Strip. The lobby was decorated with gold and platinum records from their artists, a visual history of success. Dylan gave his name to the receptionist, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, who smiled warmly and told him someone would be right with him. He'd barely sat down when Theodore appeared, hand extended. "Dylan, great to see you again. Come on back." The office was open concept, with glass-walled conference rooms and desks where people worked on computers or talked on phones. Music played softly from overhead speakers, something indie and melancholic. Theodore led Dylan to a conference room where 3 other people waited, 2 men and a woman, all in their 30s or 40s, all dressed in the casual professional style that defined the music industry. Dylan Carter, meet Nathan Rivera, our head of A&R, Claire Donovan, senior producer, and Robert Walsh, contracts and artist development. Handshakes all around, everyone friendly and welcoming. Dylan set his guitar case down and took a seat, feeling simultaneously excited and scrutinized. "Theodore couldn't stop talking about you," Nathan said, jumping right in. "We checked out some videos people posted from Rodeo Drive. Your performance of that REBA song was incredible, but we're more interested in your original material. Theodore mentioned you played something called Gravity yesterday?" "That's right," Dylan confirmed. "Would you play it for us now? And maybe 1 or 2 other originals?" Dylan pulled out his guitar, took a breath to center himself, and began. He played Gravity first, then Everything We Couldn't Say, and finally Shadows and Light, the newest song, barely 24 hours old. The room was silent except for his voice and guitar, 4 industry professionals listening with focused attention. When he finished, the silence stretched for a moment before Claire spoke. "That was exceptional. Your lyrics are intelligent without being pretentious. Your melodies are memorable. And your voice has this quality that's both polished and raw. It's exactly what we're looking for." "We think you could be huge," Nathan added. "The market right now is hungry for authentic singer-songwriters, artists who can connect emotionally with audiences. You've got that in spades." Dylan felt a rush of validation, of being seen and appreciated after years of rejection and invisibility. "Thank you. That means a lot." "Here's what we're thinking," Theodore said, leaning forward. "A development deal. We'd bring you in to record a full album, 12 to 14 tracks professionally produced. We'd handle all the costs, connect you with top-tier session musicians and producers, really polish your sound. In exchange, you'd sign with Continental for 3 albums with options for more, and we'd handle distribution, marketing, tour support, everything." It sounded perfect. Too perfect. "What about creative control?" Dylan asked, trying to channel Jackson's caution. "Would I have input on production decisions? Which songs make the album, that kind of thing?" Claire and Nathan exchanged a glance. "We definitely want your input," Claire said carefully. "But ultimately, we have to make decisions based on commercial viability. Our producers have decades of experience knowing what works in the market. We'd be collaborative, but final decisions would rest with us." "And the contract terms?" Dylan pressed. "How long would I be locked in?" Robert, the contracts guy, pulled out a folder. Standard 3-album deal with 2-year delivery windows. Continental would own the master recordings, but you'd retain songwriting credits and collect those royalties. We'd take a percentage of your touring income during the contract period, and you'd be exclusive to us. No recording with other labels, no releasing music independently. Dylan's limited knowledge of the music industry was enough to recognize that what they were describing was actually fairly standard, maybe even generous, for a new artist. But he also recognized that standard in the music business often meant heavily weighted toward the label. "Can I think about it?" Dylan asked. "Maybe have a lawyer look over the contract before signing anything." Theodore's smile tightened slightly, just for a moment, before relaxing again. "Of course, absolutely. We'd never want you to sign something you're not comfortable with, but I will say, opportunities like this don't come along often, and we're talking to other artists as well. We're very interested in you, Dylan, but we need artists who are ready to commit, ready to do the work." The implication was clear. Hesitate too long, and the offer might disappear. "I understand," Dylan said. "I definitely want to move forward. I just want to be smart about it." "Smart is good," Nathan agreed. "How about this? We'll email you the standard contract today. Take a few days to review it, consult with whoever you need to consult with, and let's plan to reconnect early next week." "Does that work?" "Perfect," Dylan said, relieved to have bought himself some time. The meeting wrapped up with more handshakes, more enthusiasm, Theodore walking him out and reiterating how excited they were about his potential. Dylan left the building feeling simultaneously elated and anxious, his mind spinning with possibilities and concerns. He took the bus back to Koreatown, his guitar pressed between his knees, watching Los Angeles roll past the window. The city was full of contradictions, beautiful and ugly, welcoming and hostile, full of dreams and littered with their wreckage. For 4 years, Dylan had been on the wreckage side of that equation. Now, maybe, he was getting a chance to be on the dream side. But at what cost? Back in the apartment, he found Jackson making himself lunch, ramen with an egg and some vegetables, elevated to something beyond its $3 price tag through professional technique. "How'd it go?" Jackson asked. Dylan told him everything. The enthusiasm, the promises, the contract terms, the pressure to decide quickly. Jackson listened, stirring his ramen thoughtfully. "Sounds like a typical label pitch. They're excited about you, which is great, but they also want to own you, which is less great. You know what you need?" "What?" "A music attorney, someone who actually understands these contracts and can negotiate on your behalf." "I can't afford an attorney," Dylan said. "I've got $300 in my account and rent due in 3 weeks. "So find one who works on contingency or spec or whatever it's called," Jackson suggested. "If this deal is real, a lawyer's percentage is worth having someone in your corner who knows what they're doing." It was good advice. Dylan spent the rest of the afternoon researching music attorneys in Los Angeles, looking for someone reputable but affordable, a challenging combination. He found a few names, sent emails explaining his situation, and hoped someone would be interested in helping a broke street musician navigate the industry. That evening, his phone buzzed with an email notification. His heart leapt, thinking it might be from REBA's management, but instead it was from Continental Records, the contract as promised. Dylan opened it on his laptop, scrolling through pages of legal language that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. He was in over his head, and he knew it. The next morning brought 2 responses to his attorney inquiries. One quoted fees that were laughably out of Dylan's budget. But the second, from a lawyer named Jennifer Huang, proposed a different arrangement. She'd review the Continental contract for free, and if she thought it was worth pursuing, would work for a small percentage of his advance and future earnings. Dylan called her immediately. "I got your email. You'd really do that?" "I would," Jennifer confirmed. Her voice was crisp, professional. I specialize in helping emerging artists, and frankly, the industry screws over new talent all the time because they don't have proper representation. If you've got a legitimate offer from Continental, I'd be happy to help you evaluate it. No promises. If the deal is garbage, I'll tell you to walk away. But if it's worthwhile, we can talk about me representing you going forward. That would be incredible, Dylan said, feeling some of his anxiety ease. I'll forward you the contract right now. Give me 48 hours, Jennifer said. I'll go through it carefully and we'll set up a call to discuss. In the meantime, don't sign anything, don't verbally commit to anything, and don't let them pressure you into rushing. After hanging up, Dylan felt like he could breathe again. He had help, someone who knew what they were doing and wasn't blinded by the excitement of opportunity. That afternoon, he returned to Rodeo Drive, partly for income and partly to maintain some sense of normalcy. He set up in his usual spot and began playing, watching tourists and shoppers flow past. Everything looked the same. The designer storefronts, the luxury cars, the casual wealth. But Dylan felt different, like he was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. A woman stopped to listen, then approached once he finished a song. That was beautiful, she said, dropping a $10 bill in his case. You should be on a stage somewhere, not a sidewalk. Working on it, Dylan replied with a smile. Maybe, just maybe, that was actually true. Jennifer Huang called 48 hours later, exactly as promised. Dylan answered on the first ring, his heart racing. I've reviewed the Continental contract, Jennifer said, dispensing with pleasantries. Want the good news or the bad news first? Bad news, Dylan said, bracing himself. The contract is exploitative, though not unusually so by industry standards. They're offering you a $25,000 advance per album, which sounds good until you realize that's recoupable, meaning you don't see another penny until the album earns back that advance, plus all production costs, marketing costs, and distribution costs. Continental would own your master recordings in perpetuity. You'd be locked in for 3 albums over 6 years, and the termination clauses are heavily weighted in their favor. If your first album underperforms by their metrics, they can drop you, but you still can't record with anyone else for the remainder of the contract term. Dylan felt his excitement deflating like a punctured balloon. And the good news? The good news is that everything I just described is negotiable, and the fact that they're interested in you gives us leverage. We can push for a higher advance, shorter contract term, reversion of rights if they don't release your album within a certain time frame, and better royalty percentages. The question is whether you think Continental is the right partner, even with better terms. I don't know, Dylan admitted. This is all so new to me. What do you think? I think you should take another meeting with them, but this time with me present, Jennifer said. Let's see how willing they are to negotiate. Their response will tell us a lot about whether they genuinely value you as an artist or just see you as another contract to exploit. They scheduled a meeting for 3 days later. Dylan spent that time in a state of anxious anticipation, alternating between excitement about the possibility and dread that it would all fall apart. He kept checking his email obsessively, still hoping for a response from REBA's management, but nothing came. The second Continental meeting was markedly different from the first. Jennifer Huang turned out to be a petite woman in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She arrived at the Continental offices with a marked-up copy of the contract and a clear agenda. Theodore, Nathan, Claire, and Robert were all present again, their friendly enthusiasm noticeably cooled by Jennifer's presence. Thanks for meeting with us again, Jennifer began, skipping pleasantries. Dylan is very interested in working with Continental, but we have significant concerns about the proposed contract terms. Let's start with the advance. What followed was 90 minutes of negotiation that felt like watching a chess match played at high speed. Jennifer methodically worked through every problematic clause, proposing alternatives and pushing back on Continental's positions. Theodore and his team countered, defended, occasionally conceded small points while holding firm on others. Dylan mostly stayed quiet, letting Jennifer advocate for him while trying to read the room. Were they annoyed by the negotiation, impressed by Jennifer's preparation, ready to walk away from the deal entirely? Finally, Nathan called for a break. "Give us 20 minutes to discuss internally," he said, and the Continental team filed out of the conference room. "How do you think it's going?" Dylan asked Jennifer once they were alone. "Hard to say," she replied, reviewing her notes. "They're not giving much ground, but they haven't walked away either. The fact that they're discussing means they're still interested." When the Continental team returned, Robert was carrying a revised contract. "We've made some adjustments," he said, sliding it across the table. Advance increased to $35,000 per album, contract term reduced to 2 albums with an option for a third, and we've added a reversion clause. If we don't release your album within 18 months of delivery, rights return to you. Jennifer scanned the document quickly. Royalty percentages: 12% on physical sales, 15% on digital and streaming, Claire said. "That's above our standard rate." Jennifer looked at Dylan, a silent question. It was better than the original offer, certainly, but was it good enough? "Can we have a day to review this version?" Dylan asked. Theodore's jaw tightened. "Dylan, we've been more than accommodating. We've increased our offer significantly, adjusted terms we normally don't budge on. But we need to know you're serious. We've got other artists interested in this development slot, and frankly, we can't keep this offer open indefinitely." The pressure was unmistakable. Sign now or risk losing the opportunity entirely. Jennifer's expression remained neutral, but Dylan caught the subtle shake of her head. "Don't be pressured." "I appreciate everything you've done," Dylan said carefully, "but this is a 6-year commitment that will shape the rest of my career. I need 24 hours to think about it. If that means the offer goes away, then I guess it wasn't meant to be." He'd surprised himself with the firmness in his voice, the willingness to walk away. Theodore looked like he wanted to argue, but Nathan raised a hand. 24 hours, Nathan said, but that's it. We'll need your decision by this time tomorrow. Outside, walking toward Jennifer's car, Dylan felt simultaneously proud of standing his ground and terrified he'd just blown his one chance. "You did good in there," Jennifer said. "Never let them rush you into a decision this big." "But what if they give the offer to someone else?" Dylan asked. "Then they weren't the right partner," Jennifer replied. "Look, Dylan, I'm going to be straight with you. This revised offer is better, but it's still not great. You'd be signing away significant control over your music and career for an advance that barely covers 6 months of living expenses in LA. Is Continental a path forward?" "Yes. Is it the only path? No. What other paths are there?" Jennifer stopped at her car, leaning against the door. "You could go independent, record and release music on your own terms, build an audience through social media and streaming platforms, maintain complete creative control. It's harder in some ways. You're responsible for everything, and you don't have a label's resources behind you. But you keep ownership of your work, and in the long run, you make more money if you succeed." "But I have no money to record an album independently," Dylan pointed out. "No equipment, no studio access, no marketing budget." "Crowdfunding," Jennifer suggested. "You've got a story. Talented musician, caring for dying father, sacrificing dreams, now trying to make it in LA. People respond to stories like that. A well-executed Kickstarter campaign could raise enough for a professional album recording, and you'd enter the market on your own terms without signing away your rights." The idea was simultaneously appealing and overwhelming. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "I do," Jennifer said. "I've helped other artists run successful campaigns. If you decide to go that route instead of Continental, I'd be willing to help you structure it. Same deal. I work on spec for a small percentage if you succeed. Dylan's head was spinning. 2 days ago, he'd thought his only option was the Continental deal. Now he was learning there were other possibilities, other paths. "Can I think about all of this?" he asked. "You should think about it," Jennifer replied. "Call me tomorrow morning with your decision and we'll proceed accordingly." That night, Dylan couldn't sleep. He lay in his narrow bed staring at the ceiling while Jackson snored softly across the room. Continental versus independent, security versus freedom, a guaranteed path forward versus a risky bet on himself. He thought about his father, about the sacrifices Raymond had made. He thought about his mother, about dreams pursued and dreams abandoned. He thought about Reba's words. "You can keep telling yourself the story of everything that went wrong, or you can start writing a new story about what comes next." Around 3 in the morning, his phone buzzed with an email notification. Dylan grabbed it, expecting spam, and froze. The sender was REBA MCENTIRE's management company. With shaking hands, he opened the email. "Mr. Carter, REBA asked us to reach out after listening to the recordings you sent. She was extremely impressed with your songwriting and vocal performance. While we're not currently signing new artists to management, REBA would like to offer her support in another way. She's invited you to open for her at 2 upcoming shows, one at the Hollywood Bowl next month and one at the Staples Center in March. This would give you exposure to thousands of potential fans and industry professionals. Additionally, REBA has offered to connect you with her producer to record a single at her expense, with no strings attached. The master recording would belong to you. If you're interested, please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss logistics. Best regards, Victoria Brennan Management, REBA MCENTIRE." Dylan read the email 3 times, certain he was hallucinating. REBA MCENTIRE wanted him to open for her, wanted to help him record a single, was offering support with no strings attached. He wanted to scream, to wake up Jackson, to run through the streets of LA, shouting about this impossible, beautiful opportunity. Instead, he sat in the dark, tears streaming down his face, feeling like the universe had just whispered, "You're worth believing in." The next morning, Dylan called Jennifer before Continental's deadline. "I'm not signing with Continental," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Okay," Jennifer replied, her tone neutral. "Independent route?" "Yes, but with a head start. I just got offered opening slots for REBA MCENTIRE at the Hollywood Bowl and Staples Center, plus a free single recording. I think I can build from that." There was a pause. Then Jennifer laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. "Dylan Carter, you buried the lead day. That's incredible. Okay, here's what we do. We record that single, make it absolutely perfect, and release it independently right before the Hollywood Bowl show. We document everything, the recording process, the preparation, your story, and use it to build buzz. By the time you perform at the Bowl, you'll have momentum. Then we leverage that momentum for a crowdfunding campaign to record a full album. You really think that could work? I think you're talented, you've got an authentic story, and you just got a massive opportunity from one of country music's biggest stars. Yes, I think it can work. It won't be easy, and there are no guarantees. But you'll own your career, your music, your choices. Isn't that what you've been fighting for all along?" Dylan thought about his father, about the 2 years of sacrifice and love. He thought about the last 4 years on Los Angeles street corners, about every rejection and disappointment. He thought about the weight he'd been carrying and the lightness he was starting to feel. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly what I've been fighting for." He called Theodore Grant next, declining Continental's offer as politely and professionally as possible. Theodore was clearly disappointed, even a bit annoyed, but ultimately wished him well, the kind of generic well-wishing that meant nothing at all. Then Dylan went to Rodeo Drive, not to perform, but to walk the same stretch of sidewalk where this unlikely journey had begun. He stopped at the spot where he'd been sitting when REBA MCENTIRE had stopped to listen. The boutique was still there, the tourists still flowed past, the luxury cars still gleamed in the California sun. But something fundamental had shifted. Dylan was no longer just a musician treading water, waiting to drown or be rescued. He was an artist, choosing his own path, writing his own story, trusting that the sacrifices and struggles of the past had been preparing him for exactly this moment. His phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. "Just heard from landlord, building's being renovated. We have to be out in 60 days. Sorry, man." Dylan read the message and laughed. Actually laughed. Of course, because that's how life worked. Just when things started looking up, a new challenge appeared. But instead of feeling defeated, he felt energized. He'd figure it out. He'd find a new place, or maybe he'd move somewhere cheaper, use the money he saved for recording equipment. It was all part of the story, all part of the journey. He typed back, "It's okay, change is good, we'll figure it out." And for the first time in years, Dylan Carter believed that was true. The Hollywood Bowl Show was 6 weeks away. Dylan had work to do, recording a single, promoting it, preparing to perform for thousands of people. But before all that, he had this moment, standing on Rodeo Drive, guitar case at his feet, the afternoon sun warm on his face, feeling the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. He pulled out his guitar, sat down on the ledge one last time, and began to play. Not for money, not for opportunity, but for the pure joy of making music. Tourists stopped. A few filmed on their phones. Someone dropped bills into his case, but Dylan barely noticed. He sang, "Is There Life Out There?" the song that had started everything, but this time the question felt less like a lament and more like an invitation. Yes, there was life out there. More than he'd imagined, more than he'd allowed himself to hope for, and he was finally ready to live it. A woman walking past paused, listening, and when Dylan finished, she approached. "That was beautiful," she said. "You're going to be famous someday." Dylan smiled, thinking about the Hollywood Bowl, about the single he'd record, about the uncertain, exhilarating future ahead. "Maybe," he said, "but honestly, I'm just grateful for today." And he meant it. After years of mourning the past and fearing the future, Dylan Carter had finally arrived in the present. He'd learned that dreams deferred aren't dreams denied, that sacrifice could lead to strength, and that sometimes the most important story you tell is the one you tell yourself about who you're becoming. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across Rodeo Drive. Dylan packed up his guitar, pocketed the day's earnings, and headed toward the bus stop. He had calls to make, plans to coordinate, a future to build. But first, he had one more call to make. He pulled out his phone and searched for a number he hadn't dialed in 18 years. His mother's number had changed countless times over the years, but social media had made people easier to find. After his father's death, Dylan had looked her up once, just to know she was still alive, and had found her Facebook profile. Patricia Carter, now Patricia Martinez, living in Nashville, working as a waitress just as he'd heard years ago. He'd never reached out. The anger and abandonment had felt too raw, too justified. But standing here now, having just made the choice to write a new story about his life, Dylan realized that new stories sometimes required closing old chapters properly. He found her number through a mutual contact, a cousin who'd maintained sporadic contact with Patricia over the years. His finger hovered over the call button for a full minute before he pressed it. The phone rang 4 times. Dylan was about to hang up when a woman's voice answered, cautious and uncertain. "Hello? Mom?" The word felt strange in his mouth, unused for so long. "It's Dylan." Silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Dylan, my Dylan." "Yeah, it's me." Oh my God, baby, Her voice cracked with emotion. I never thought. I tried to find you after your daddy passed. I saw it online, the obituary. I wanted to come to the funeral, but I thought you wouldn't want me there. I wouldn't have, Dylan admitted. Not then. And now? Dylan watched a group of tourists pose for photos, watched the endless flow of life on Rodeo Drive, and thought about everything that had brought him to this moment. Now I think I'm ready to understand, he said. I'm not saying I'm ready to forgive everything or forget what it felt like when you left, but I'm ready to hear your side, to know who you were and who you became. Patricia started crying, deep, shaking sobs that carried years of guilt and grief. I made so many mistakes, Dylan. I was so young, so selfish. I thought I could find something better out there, but all I found was loneliness and regret. Your father was a good man, and I threw that away. And you, God, I missed watching you grow up. That's time I can never get back. No, you can't, Dylan agreed, but we have time now if you want it. I'm in LA trying to make it as a musician. Dad always said I got your talent. Maybe we could talk sometime about music, about life, about who we both are now. I'd like that, Patricia whispered. I'd like that so much. Dylan, I know I don't deserve another chance, but if you're offering one, I'm offering a conversation, Dylan clarified. Let's start there and see where it goes. They talked for another 20 minutes, carefully, tentatively, two strangers who happened to share DNA and history. Patricia told him about her years chasing Nashville dreams that never materialized, about the waitressing jobs and bad relationships, about finally accepting that she was never going to be a star, but trying to find contentment anyway. Dylan told her about Berkeley, about caring for his father, about the street corners and the struggle. And he told her about REBA MCENTIRE, about the chance encounter that had become an opportunity, that had become a turning point. You're going to open for REBA MCENTIRE. Patricia's voice filled with a mother's pride she'd forfeited the right to express. Dylan, that's incredible. Your daddy would be so proud. I'm proud. Thanks, Dylan said, and surprised himself by meaning it. They made plans to talk again in a few days, exchanged email addresses and social media contacts, and said goodbye. When Dylan hung up, he felt lighter still, not because everything was suddenly fixed with his mother, but because he'd chosen to stop carrying the anger as armor. The bus ride home gave him time to process everything. In less than a week, his entire life had transformed. He'd gone from invisible street musician to someone with real opportunities, real support, real possibilities. But more importantly, he'd transformed internally, from someone trapped by the past to someone actively creating a future. Back at the apartment, Jackson was packing up his section of the room, already preparing for their forced move. I've been looking at places, Jackson said. Found a 2-bedroom in Highland Park for $2 grand. If we get a third roommate, it's about $700 each. You interested? Actually, Dylan said, I think I might look for a place on my own. Something small, affordable. I need space to write and record without worrying about disturbing roommates. Jackson looked surprised, then understanding. You're really doing this? The music thing, for real? I'm really doing it, Dylan confirmed. And Jackson, I couldn't have survived these last 3 years without you. You gave me a place to stay when I had nothing. You never judged me for singing on street corners. You believed in me when I barely believed in myself. I won't forget that. We're dreamers, Jackson said with a shrug. We've got to stick together. And hey, when you're famous and playing sold-out shows, maybe you'll remember the line cook who ate ramen with you in a shitty studio apartment. I'll do better than remember, Dylan promised. I'll put you in a song. They spent the evening the way they'd spent so many evenings, eating cheap food, talking about dreams, supporting each other through the uncertainty of chasing something bigger than themselves. But this time, it felt less like commiseration and more like celebration. Over the next 6 weeks, Dylan's life accelerated into a beautiful chaos. He worked with REBA's producer, a Grammy-winning legend named Christopher Hayes, to record Shadows and Light. The experience was revelatory. Christopher pushed Dylan to dig deeper emotionally, to find new colors in his voice, to trust the song enough to be vulnerable within it. The single was mixed, mastered, and released on streaming platforms 2 weeks before the Hollywood Bowl show. Jennifer helped Dylan create social media accounts and document the process, the recording sessions, his preparation, his story. The posts were raw and authentic, Dylan speaking directly to camera about his father, his struggles, his gratitude for this opportunity. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Shadows and Light was added to several popular Spotify playlists. Music blogs picked up his story. The video of Reba stopping to listen to him on Rodeo Drive, originally posted by a tourist, went viral, accumulating millions of views. By the time the Hollywood Bowl show arrived, Dylan had gained 30,000 Instagram followers. His single had been streamed over 1 million times, and industry people who'd rejected him months earlier were suddenly reaching out. The night of the Hollywood Bowl show, Dylan stood backstage, guitar in hand, watching through a gap in the curtain as 18,000 people filled the iconic venue. The stage crew bustled around him, checking equipment and calling out technical instructions. His stomach churned with nerves, unlike anything he'd felt performing on street corners. Reba found him there, 20 minutes before showtime. "You ready?" she asked, a knowing smile on her face. "Terrified," Dylan admitted. "Good. That means you care. But Dylan, remember, you've been performing for years. The only difference tonight is the size of the audience. Sing for them the way you sang for me on Rodeo Drive. Honest, present, real. That's what they came for." "Thank you," Dylan said, and the words carried the weight of everything she'd done for him. "For believing in me, for giving me this chance, for—" "Don't thank me yet," Reba interrupted with a wink. "You've still got to get through the performance without passing out. Now go warm up. You're on in 15. Those 15 minutes passed in a blur. Then Dylan was walking onto the stage, the lights blinding and beautiful, the crowd's applause washing over him like a wave. He stepped up to the microphone, adjusted his guitar strap, and looked out at thousands of faces. For a moment, panic threatened. Then he spotted someone in the front row, Jackson, who'd managed to snag a ticket, holding up his phone and giving Dylan a thumbs up. And just beyond Jackson, he imagined he could see his father, could feel Raymond Carter's presence, his pride, his belief that Dylan was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Good evening, Hollywood Bowl," Dylan said into the microphone, his voice steady. "My name is Dylan Carter, and I'm honored to be here tonight. 6 weeks ago, I was singing on street corners in Beverly Hills. Then, Reba McEntire stopped to listen, and my life changed. This song is called Shadows and Light, and it's about learning that sometimes you have to walk through darkness to find your way back to hope." He began to play, and 18,000 people fell silent, listening. Dylan poured everything into the performance, every loss, every lesson, every moment of doubt and determination. His voice filled the bowl, strong and clear and authentically his own. When the final note faded, the applause was thunderous. Dylan stood there, tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the moment and everything it represented. This was what his father had believed was possible. This was what Dylan had given up on believing for himself. And here it was, real and happening, earned through sacrifice and struggle and the willingness to keep showing up even when success seemed impossible. He performed 2 more songs, originals that the crowd now knew from his social media presence. Before thanking them and exiting the stage, Reba was waiting in the wings, and she pulled him into a hug. "You were brilliant," she said. "Absolutely brilliant." The rest of the night passed in a blur. Congratulations from Reba's team, meeting industry people who suddenly wanted to talk. texting with Jennifer about next steps. But the moment Dylan treasured most came after the show, when Jackson found him backstage. "You did it, man," Jackson said, his eyes bright with emotion. "You really did it." "We're doing it," Dylan corrected. "Both of us in our own ways. You'll get your restaurant someday, Jackson. I believe it." "And you'll get everything you deserve," Jackson replied. "Grammy nominations, sold-out tours, all of it." "But Dylan, don't lose this," he gestured around them, at the organized chaos of post-show breakdown, at the reality of creative work made manifest. "Don't lose the part of yourself that could be happy singing on a sidewalk. That's the part that made tonight special." Dylan nodded, understanding. Success would bring new challenges, new pressures, new ways to lose yourself if you weren't careful. But he'd learned something through the struggles of the last few years, that happiness wasn't a destination you reached, but a choice you made every day, regardless of circumstances. The crowdfunding campaign launched the next week, with a goal of $50,000 to record a full album independently. Dylan documented the process on social media, shared more of his story, and asked his growing audience to be part of the journey. Within 48 hours, the campaign was fully funded. By the end of the week, it had raised over $90,000. The Staples Center show 3 weeks later was even more successful than the Hollywood Bowl. Dylan's confidence had grown, his stage presence solidified. He performed for 20,000 people, like he'd been born to do exactly that, and the ovation he received confirmed what everyone was now saying. Dylan Carter was going to be a star. But the moment that mattered most to Dylan came 2 months later, on a random Tuesday afternoon. He'd just signed the lease on a small one-bedroom apartment in Echo Park. Nothing fancy, but his own space, paid for with money earned from his music. He was setting up his recording equipment in the corner he'd designated as his studio when his phone rang. "Dylan?" "It's Mom." They'd been talking weekly since that first conversation, slowly rebuilding something that might eventually resemble a relationship. Patricia had been following his success online, sharing his posts with her friends in Nashville, telling anyone who'd listen that this talented young musician was her son. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" "I'm in Los Angeles," Patricia said. "I took a few days off work and I wondered if you'd be willing to meet for coffee. I know we've been talking on the phone, but I'd like to see you, if you're ready." Dylan looked around his apartment, at the space he'd created for himself, at the evidence of a life he was actively building rather than passively enduring. He thought about the weight he'd carried for so long and how much lighter it felt now, not because the past had changed, but because he'd chosen a different relationship with it. "I'm ready," he said. "There's a place called Groundwork Coffee. I'll text you the address." They met the next day, two people connected by history and DNA, but strangers in all the ways that mattered. Patricia looked older than Dylan remembered, lines around her eyes, silver threading through her red hair, but her smile was the same one he'd loved as a child. They talked for 3 hours, finally face to face, sharing stories and sorrows and small hopes for whatever came next. Dylan didn't offer complete forgiveness. Some wounds needed more time to heal, but he offered something more valuable, the possibility of a future that included both of them, imperfect, but present. As they said goodbye on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, Patricia hugged him tightly. "I know I don't have the right to be proud of you," she said, "but I am. What you've accomplished, who you've become, it's extraordinary." "I had good teachers," Dylan replied, thinking of his father, of Reba, of Jackson and Jennifer, and everyone who'd supported him. "And I learned from the hard lessons too. All of it mattered, Mom, even the painful parts." 6 months after that chance encounter on Rodeo Drive, Dylan Carter released his debut album, Is There Life Out There, named in honor of the song that had changed everything. The album was a critical and commercial success, praised for its emotional honesty and musical craftsmanship. It debuted in the top 20 on the Billboard charts and earned Dylan his first gold record. But the success he valued most couldn't be measured in sales or streams or awards. It was measured in the relationships he'd repaired, the peace he'd made with his past, the life he was actively creating rather than passively enduring. It was measured in phone calls with his mother in the new apartment Jackson had found near his dream restaurant location, in the email from Berkeley offering him an Alumni Achievement Award. Most of all, it was measured in the music itself, songs that helped other people feel less alone in their struggles, that reminded them that dreams deferred weren't dreams denied, that transformation was always possible if you were willing to do the work. On the one-year anniversary of meeting REBA on Rodeo Drive, Dylan returned to that spot. He brought his guitar, not to perform for money, but to honor the place where everything had changed. He sat on the same ledge, played the same song, and marveled at how different his life looked from the outside while feeling fundamentally the same on the inside. He was still Dylan Carter, still the kid from Bakersfield, who'd lost his mother twice, who'd sacrificed college to care for his dying father, who'd spent years on street corners wondering if he'd made all the wrong choices. But now, he was also the artist who'd learned that every experience, even the painful ones, could become the raw material for transformation. That sometimes the longest route to your dreams was actually the only route that would get you there intact. A tourist couple stopped to listen, just as they had a year ago. When Dylan finished, the woman smiled. "Are you someone famous?" she asked. "You sound really good." Dylan smiled, thinking about everything that had brought him to this moment, the loss and the love, the rejection and the redemption, the darkness and the light. "I'm just someone who never stopped singing," he said, "even when the path wasn't clear, even when success seemed impossible. I kept showing up, kept creating, kept believing that somewhere out there, life was waiting for me." The couple took a photo with him, told him they'd look up his music and moved on. Dylan packed up his guitar and stood, ready to return to his life, to the album he was writing, to the tour he was planning, to the relationships he was nurturing. But before he left, he pulled out his phone and sent a text to REBA. "1 year ago today, you stopped to listen. Thank you for hearing not just the music, but the person making it. Thank you for reminding me that new stories are always possible. I'm living proof." Her response came quickly. "You did the work, Dylan. I just helped you see what was already there. Keep shining. The world needs your light." Dylan pocketed his phone and headed down Rodeo Drive, past the luxury boutiques and expensive cars, past the life he'd once watched from the outside. Now he walked among it, not because he'd become wealthy or famous, though those things were starting to happen, but because he'd finally learned that he belonged here, belonged anywhere he chose to be, belonged to the story he was actively writing about his own life. The California sun warmed his shoulders as he walked, and somewhere in the distance he could hear music playing. Another street performer, another dreamer, another person choosing to share their gift with the world despite the uncertainty. Dylan smiled, recognizing himself in that distant melody. "We're all just trying to answer the same question," he thought. "Is there life out there beyond the fear and the doubt? Is there something more waiting for us if we're brave enough to keep reaching for it?" The answer, he'd learned, was always yes. You just had to be willing to keep singing until someone stopped to listen. And then, more importantly, you had to be willing to listen to yourself, to the voice inside that knew your worth even when the world hadn't recognized it yet, to the dreams that refused to die even when circumstances tried to bury them, to the possibility that transformation could begin with a single choice to write a different ending to your story. Dylan Carter had made that choice. And in doing so, he discovered that the life he'd been searching for had been waiting inside him all along, not in fame or fortune or external validation, but in the courage to show up fully as himself, to share his truth through music, and to believe that even after loss and sacrifice and years of struggle, redemption was possible. He was living proof, and his song was just beginning.